Hey everyone, welcome to the Script and Style Show, the web show where we talk about web development and the people that make it happen. I'm Todd Gardner from Trek.js, and my co-host, David Walsh, creator of the popular blog, davidwalsh.name. How's it going today, David?
Good, man. How are you?
Good, good. Things are happening over here. We got a PubConf coming up on Wednesday. The NDC Minnesota conference has ramped up, going on this week. And we rented out a bar on Wednesday night in downtown St. Paul called the Amsterdam. And we have a fantastic show. Tons of cool people are coming in. So have some tickets available if anybody's interested, but it's going to be a good night on Wednesday.
So remind me, what happens at PubConf?
So I picked 10 speakers who I think are particularly entertaining and funny to do 5-minute funny talks in the bar.
Okay.
It's Ignite theme or Ignite format. So like 5 minutes, 20 slides, 15 seconds per slide, or 20 seconds per slide, whatever that timing ends up being. 5 minutes, and it's not really about technology or teaching you things, because that's what a real conference is for. PubConf is just about making people laugh, being a little sarcastic about things. And we, have some beers and have some food and tell some jokes, and it's a great old time.
And you said it was this Wednesday.
It's this Wednesday at the Amsterdam in St. Paul.
Okay, it's not going to clash with Game of Thrones, because there are some things that are sacred.
I know. I mean, I couldn't schedule it Sunday night, both because of Game of Thrones and because, I live in Minnesota and bars close on Sunday, and it's boring.
What?
Well, they don't totally close, but they all close at 9 o'clock, and that wouldn't be very fun.
Really?
So, well, most of them do.
So in Wisconsin, you can't buy alcohol after 9 o'clock unless you're at a bar or restaurant. Bar time is 2 o'clock here.
Yeah.
Sundays, every day. Anyways, this sounds like fun, man.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time. So if anybody out there is interested and is in the neighborhood, we can still got some tickets available at pubconf.io. But on to the main topic of the day. Today we are going to talk about getting a job in tech for all of you listeners who are thinking about it or are thinking about maybe the next job where you're going to jump to or just starting to break in. We're going to talk about that today. And we have a fantastic panel of people with real, relevant and timely expertise in this who can help us get through it. First up, Susan, who is a QA engineer at Target and a recovering recruiter.
Hello.
Emily, who runs apprenticeship programs for software engineering at Treehouse and is also a recovering recruiter.
Hey there.
And Susan, a technical support engineer from Kipsu and a recent graduate, a couple-year-old graduate from Prime Digital Academy, a code school here in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area.
Hi, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
So before we jump in, we like to talk about some recent tech news. And I think there was a very interesting thing that happened since our last show. Hertz, the giant car rental company, decided to sue their contractor, their software development contractor, Accenture, for $32 million because they used Angular.
Shots fired. I don't think that's exactly why.
No, that's not exactly why. They charged them $32 million because Accenture had charged them $32 million in fees to do this major rebuilding over the course of a couple of years. And after, I think 2 years of development or 3 years of development, they had no working software. They didn't have anything they could ship. None of their new website stuff worked. It didn't they wanted to build a thing that would work across all their different brands, because they own I think Dollar and some other rental car brands as well. And they wanted to be able to just, stamp out the same thing with all of them. But everything was hard coded and nothing worked quite right. And so this is pretty major. This is a cool opportunity for all the people who are independents or work for small software development houses. The big guys that they just got mud all over their face with this one.
This is pretty bad. I mean, $32 million to come up with nothing. I see that the article also mentions that the website doesn't seem to be responsive, which is sort of Web 101.
Especially in 2019, right? You charge a company $32 million and it doesn't work on an iPhone. Like,
Well, that's what the extra 10 million that they were asking for was for, right? I mean, it's oh my gosh, it's day one stuff, right? The responsiveness should be pretty easy. A big part of me wonders how boiled down in specs they got, because that can make, like the more exact specs you get, the more it's going to bog down developers, engineers. I would say that there should be, for $32 million, you should have a branding person. I couldn't believe what I was reading when I read this story, and it brought me back to my first job, where we sold.
Because you worked for a small software development. Yeah.
Small shop, yeah. We sold the services of creating a e-commerce site for someone, with very few specs. So we got the site up, you could order off of it, everything, that we assumed you'd want to do. And then we got pushback from the customer that we weren't collecting sales tax appropriately. And they didn't, that not only we weren't collecting sales tax at all, which the e-commerce solution would allow you to do, but they wanted it down to the specific state, county, every tiny little rule of sales tax you could ever have. And so I pushed back upward saying, this is not reasonable, nowhere near reasonable for the price that they're paying for this. And what my employer did in return was hire an intern who sat there for hours upon hours a day, entering percentages for different counties all around the country. And I'm trying to blend what happened there, which obviously wasn't good, with what's happening with Accenture, which seems like the other side of things, which was obviously much worse. I don't understand how a situation can get to this point. Where as a vendor, you've taken $32 million from someone, and there's no, was there ever a walkthrough of what things look like now? I'm desperate to have been in some of those meetings to figure out how it could have gotten so far gone that this is what happened.
Yeah. How do you let a project go that far and not have anything released? Are people still doing great big waterfall projects that don't release anything for years and years and years? That just seems so weird to me. That you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot with these giant bills. Anyway, I think this was super interesting. And if you're a small development shop, I think this is a big marketing opportunity for you to point yourself as not being like Accenture. Okay, let's get on to our main topic of the day, getting a job in tech. So we work in tech. We've all gotten jobs in tech. We will get future jobs in tech, probably. But there's a lot that goes into that. The first thing is where do you want to get a job? What is the right organization for you to join, and how do you figure out what that is? For most markets, there's a lot of companies hiring. There's not just one place to go. How do you look for finding the right place to go? Sarah, how did you know that Kipsu was the right place for you?
That's sort of even a trick question, honestly.
Uh-oh, I didn't mean to trick you.
Because going through Prime, getting to meet people in the industry and networking at meetups and whatnot, I actively told people at the Hackers and Founders meetup that I didn't see myself working at a startup. And here I am working at a startup. So I wouldn't say that leaving Prime with a 20-week boot camp under my belt, I knew that a startup was going to be the place I would land. But getting to know people through the interview process, getting to know people at the company, in the team or department I'm working with, that helped make me feel more comfortable. Kipsu is going to be the place to call home and where I wanted to spend most of my days working. But I can also say that I applied to a lot of other places that aren't anything like Kipsu, and they lost out.
What would you say the things that Kipsu did that made you transition then? You were you were anti-startup. You're like, I don't want to work at a startup. And then you ended up there. So like they must have really impressed you with something to make you flip over.
Yeah, it was a combination of things, really. The perception of the startup being very high risk. It could be sort of a tedious work environment, or very prone to burnout. And the fact that they were coming up on 8 years when I joined the team showed that they have some staying power. They're sort of more of the teenage startup. And through the interview process, getting to actually meet with members of the team that I am primarily working on through the customer success team, getting to see the personalities and the interest in teamwork, and it's all hands on deck, and we over communicate to make sure we get the point across. They weren't setting you up for failure. They wanted you to succeed right alongside them. So I would say going through the interview process, the openness to that communication and awareness of what the company is doing and how they're constantly iterating to become better made me want to be part of the team.
That's great. Susan, how about you? How did you know Target was the right place for you?
So sort of the opposite. I had worked for startups for the last, and by startups I mean maybe like companies under 6 employees. Some of them were well established, but some of them were pretty new. And at that point, I was also changing my career from being a recruiter to working in technology as a QA engineer. I guess I did initially go to a smaller company first, but Target was attractive to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, the opportunity to learn from a bunch of people. I was working on a QA team of like 2 and not really getting anywhere. So I knew like working on a giant application, like the flagship app at Target, would really sort of cement myself in a career that I wanted to move towards. And I, over the years of just like being in meetups and stuff, knew some folks at Target and really respected them and wanted to work alongside them.
So that's great. You saw tons of other smart people there to learn from and continue growing. That's really cool. What about you, Emily? How long have you been at Treehouse?
4 years now, and I feel like my story's kind of a blend of the two. This is funny because I had no clue who I'd be here with today. I worked for like a huge recruiting firm before I came to Treehouse and wasn't even looking for a job, but had been networking pretty extensively and was donating some of my time to help a program here that was training people up in the community using Treehouse, which is the company I work for now. So they were the online curriculum provider. And they had an opening come up and a bunch of people gave them my name. So they reached out and I was like, oh, sure, I'll chat, whatever. And it ended up being a great opportunity for me. So it was kind of a blend I didn't know I was looking for of a tech startup, working remotely for the first time. The company's based in Portland, Oregon, and I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. And then getting to like help people get into technology and build out paid apprenticeship programs across the country with a bunch of different tech companies is pretty awesome. So for me, it was a good way to get out of recruiting and help recover from it and feel like I was actually like giving back and getting people opportunities that have historically been like locked out, right? It's hard to break into tech. That first job is so hard. When you're a recruiter, you're helping all the people that have like made it and they're going on to job 6 or 7 or whatever. So I felt like I was actually gonna really make a difference. And yeah, it's been great. That's why I've been there 4 years now.
Awesome. Well, so my next question was all about like, how do you make the company interested in you? But it sounds like for your case, like they sought you out. They're like, they knew they were interested in you. They saw you as this expert and they wanted to pull you in.
Yeah, it was weird. It totally made like the imposter syndrome go off for sure. I never thought I'd be that person who was like, oh no, we want to talk to you. I'm like, what, who, me? But honestly, like networking and just not being a jerk and getting to know your community and like
not being a jerk.
That's
the big lesson, not being a jerk.
But like being a part of your community and giving of your time and what knowledge you have and also open to knowledge from others, I think you can build some great relationships. And then when the right opportunity comes up, your name just kind of surfaces up. And I think it goes the other way too. Like if you're just putting feelers out, even if you're not like specifically looking right now, but you're networking and getting to know people, you'll start to see like, all the people I meet that work at this company, like Target, seem cool. They're working on cool stuff, advanced stuff. They seem like they'd share their knowledge with me. Like, I think I might like it there if something came up, right? So you kind of get to know them and like vet them before you ever get to the interview process. And I think that helps so much.
What about you, David? How did you know that Mozilla was right?
So when I look at,
I don't even know. How long have you worked for Mozilla?
as of last week, 7 years.
That was a long time.
It's been a while. It's been a while. So when I look at the jobs that I've had 3 web jobs. They sort of coincided with phases of my life. The first was right out of college, where you'll take anything to get out of the job that you're working at that's non-tech related that you put yourself through school in. The second job, I was just sort of done with working in offices. I didn't want to do it anymore. I was in a cubicle. I hated it. I was, it was depressing. And I just said, I need to, 1, challenge myself more. 2, I need to work remotely because I hate the office. And 3, Mozilla was always my dream job, like from when I was 16, 17 years old. And so it didn't take a lot of thinking to say yes to that. But I knew Mozilla was a great fit because I had contributed beforehand. I loved Firefox, and what was really important to me is that I knew people that worked at Mozilla who were super proud to work there and felt like they were achieving and that the company was good to them. So that was sort of my arc. What about yours, Todd?
I haven't gotten a real job in a while. I'm not really good to like participate in this one because I worked for myself the better part of the last 10 years versus like an independent consultant and then as Track.js. But when I was a consultant, like a big part of choosing the client, choosing who you would work with is the other people who are there. Like, I guess I would say that I'd been tired of, like you said, I was tired of a corporate gig for a long time, and I didn't like any of the I've always had a very low tolerance for the corporate pageantry of like reorganizations and all staff meetings and performance like
metrics,
rating and all of that sort of stuff. It irritated me from the very beginning. And so I tend to like kind of put that aside and be like, every organization I've ever been a part of has had that bureaucracy. And so take that aside. And it's more about the people who are there. Like, are there people there who I think are cool, who I think are smarter than I am, and I can learn something from them and I can participate, like we can work together and like be more than if we were by ourselves. And so that's what I've always looked for. Is like who is in those places that I can collaborate with. And when I've left a gig, it's always because like the people who I'd established like really good bonds with had, left and moved on. So
yeah, that's a really hard part about working somewhere you love is the fact that, some people might get recruited away.
Yeah.
And that goes a long way toward how you feel about your job.
Yeah, because when you find yourself in like a really high productive team, those groups tend to stay together for a long, long time. And it's only when people start leaving or getting reorganized out that like everybody's like, oh, this isn't as fun as it used to be, and then they move on.
It becomes work, right?
Yeah, then it's not a clubhouse anymore where you come in and like hack together. It's a job where you have like tickets, and then it's not fun. Okay, let's get back and talk about like, all right, so you find a place that is cool, that meets your criteria, that is something that you want. How do you get them interested in you? We heard from Emily where you be super active in the community and don't be a jerk, and the company is going to seek you out for your expertise. But for Sarah or Susan, like, how did you make them interested in you?
Yeah, I was going to echo a lot of what Emily said. I think for me, in kind of the unique circumstance of trying to enter into an industry in which I didn't have any experience, and it's not like, the trajectory for a QA engineer is not necessarily like you go to school and then you like learn this skill set. It's really a lot more about like building your own personal brand, knowing some people in a company, and like being known because you're in the community. I think at least I think is true for me, and what I've seen with other people is like, when you're a part of a community, it's sort of like you're interviewing all of the time. You're like doing a lot of candid interviews through like relationship building over years. And in my case, it did take years to like know enough people, know the right people, engage with them in conversation, help them. That was another thing too, is like, it's not only asking people for help, it's connecting other people, people with other people that might provide them opportunity. So I think that had a lot to do with it for me, as well as like, of course, I did independently seek my own knowledge, and like was able to share some stories about things that I was looking into and working on, and like demonstrating, enthusiasm for like improving my own success, I guess.
How good you were at finding broken parts of things.
Yes.
I love that thing about being part of the community is like interviewing all the time. You mentioned around building a personal brand. That's kind of an interesting concept. Like, what do you think? Like, what is an effective personal brand? What would you define personal brand to be?
Well, there's a number of ways you can do it. I'm not a blogger, but people can write blogs, engage in intelligent conversation like you two seem to do. Showing up at events, honestly, this is sort of lame, but like Twitter is a real easy way to like show your personality, engage with other people in conversation in a way that's like pretty accessible. Volunteer for things, get involved in organizing of events and stuff like that. I think are all pretty easy ways to have your name be recognizable.
Awesome. Well, you definitely had a personal brand, like through all the stuff that you were doing, recruiting to build off of. And I imagine that was like, kind of like one of the most hardcore ways to build a network. Like, your job as a recruiter is to like build a network and be active in the community, right?
Well, yeah, not only to like, recruiting is an entirely different thing. It's like extremely competitive, especially in Minneapolis right now. Emily is giving sympathetic nods. Sorry. Yeah, so you want to stand out. You don't want to be your typical like kind of personality-less people pusher. People don't trust you, and they shouldn't if you don't really care about building an actual relationship with somebody. So yes, it was my job, but also like ultimately I knew that I wanted to get out of it. And so, yeah, it became very important for me to try to differentiate myself in that way.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to like switch over from that network, even though it's still in the tech community, but going from like recruiter into like actually working in tech, and you like have to prove yourself all over again. Like, hopefully you were transparent and had good enough character while you were a recruiter that people are like, oh, you weren't one of the crappy ones? Okay, cool. We can maybe hang out. And you have to like start over and like kind of prove yourself a little bit more, because they hear that word and cringe, and it's because there are a lot of bad ones out there. So it's hard.
I just want to chime in and echo what Susan said about having a personal brand. Without my blog and without Twitter,
Mr. Personal Brand.
I would still be at a tiny web shop, toiling away with zip codes and small e-commerce sites. So I can speak to how important that is and how much it can change your life.
Totally. And I would also reiterate the volunteering for organizations and helping to organize things, especially if you're an introvert like me. It gives you like some busy work to do while you're there and you're still making the connections. And for me, it always took the pressure off of having to socialize the whole time. And you really get to know people. That's been awesome for me. I used to help run Codepalooza here in Louisville. I helped do speaker selections for a couple different conferences now. And it's been very rewarding and just a wonderful way to make connections.
You just gave me a good idea to recruit some more volunteers for an event next week.
Awesome.
Reach out to all my introverts. That would be perfect.
Well, great. Connections happening all around.
Yeah.
All right. So
Recruiter.
it's the recruiter panel. All right. So we found cool organizations and we've made them interested in us. And now we've landed an interview. So what happens now? So Sarah, you mentioned earlier all the stuff you learned in your interview with Kip Sue. How do you do that? How do you be really successful in an interview? What do you need to make sure that they learn about you and you learn about them?
I had the opportunity to learn who I was interviewing with ahead of actually interviewing with them, as far as even getting a link to their LinkedIn page. So I could even come up with some more curated questions specifically for the people I was meeting with. I know that doesn't happen everywhere, but it certainly made me feel all the more welcome in coming into this space. At KIPSU, the interview process is also fairly lengthy. You go from a phone screen to core value interview 1, core value interview 2. Typically, then they check your references, and then you have the one-on-one with the CEO, which is still an interview, except after your initial conversation, it tends to be you interviewing him. So knowing that I was going to have a number of opportunities to get to know people and learn about the company, even just kind of phrasing questions in different ways so that you can try and get more information out of different people. I tend to cover a whole page in questions, and that way I can sort of pick out which ones that I want to use, or, based on X research from an article or a site, someone's blog, just to kind of get further to the information that is important to me in the place that I'm looking to work for. But as far as actually showcasing myself in the interview and trying to bring out all of my strengths, coming from a not tech role, a non-tech background prior to going through Prime, I sort of feel like I need to put all of my cards out on the table. I'm still learning at coding. I'm still getting my feet under me in that respect. And so I have a lot of other professional skills that I can bring to the table, and just not necessarily wanting to hand them all over and say I can do all of the things, but at least seeming eager and willing to jump in to do so.
So what were the things that were important to you? Like when you were like tailoring your questions for these things, like what are the things that you found important that you wanted to suss out of that interview?
I wanted to make sure the environment was going to be supportive. Having gone through Prime, they have a very large focus on mentorship and sort of helping get the next person up into their role and feeling comfortable and feeling accomplished so that they can move on and continue to develop in even more senior ways. So asking a lot of questions about what the evolution of an employee in this role has looked like before, what do they see of it looking like in the future. In my case in particular, the role hadn't existed previously. So like, in the worst possible scenario, what does this look like? In the best possible scenario, what does success look like? Just kind of trying to navigate what the future might hold.
I love that. The evolution of what that role would look like. I think that's a really important question, because if you find the right fit, you might be with that company for a number of years. And so understanding like how that role can grow in the company, like, do you top out in engineering? Like when you hit a certain spot, are you forced into management in order to keep growing? Or are you like, is there tech tracks? I think that's a really interesting question. Susan, what kind of things are important to you? Like when you went for your interview at Target, what kind of things were you trying to like learn about them and make sure they knew about you?
Yeah, so I'd mentioned before about like coming from startup type companies, and the thing that I like about startups is like generally it's, I don't know exactly how to articulate it, but people show up as their full selves, and I feel like some of that gets erased in the bureaucracy that you were touching on, Todd, at the beginning. And when you look at large companies, there's this whole like set of, I don't know, kind of abbreviations of people's stuff. So like when I'm in an interview, I am assessing culture as the loudest thing that I'm looking for, especially when I'm looking at going into a large company. And so I'm trying to get an understanding of the people that I'm in an interview with, asking them very direct questions about like, what are things that suck about your job? What, and like try to help people open up and tell the truth, I think was really powerful for me, at least at Target, but also in general, when I think about looking for somewhere else to go.
What sucks about this job is a fantastic question.
Totally.
People are sometimes they're off put by that though, and so that's why I say like that's just what works for me, because that's I don't know, part of my brand is just, you know, I want to have a candid, honest conversation with the people with whom I might work for or work with.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean, even if you don't phrase it like that, understanding that like sometimes work is just work, and like there's parts of it that are not going to be fun and not going to work out, not going to be enjoyable. Like, and what are the things in that company, and are they things you're willing to tolerate to get the good sides?
Totally. I always ask, or I always say every job has 2 pounds of shit. It's just up to you which 2 pounds you want to deal with. But it's there everywhere, and everyone has a tolerance level. So your phrasing was actually better than mine, at least for an interview.
I think also when you hear people talk candidly about the challenges of their work, whether it's the product that they're working on or the environment that they're in, it then makes the good things about the job seem more honest to me. Or something.
Yeah. What are you mentioned earlier that you were looking, the thing that's important to you is to see the culture of the company, of the corporation you were joining. What are the things that you were looking for in that culture?
Looking for a culture of, well, first of all, looking for teams that are like product teams, right? So I don't want to join a team that doesn't have a product owner or doesn't have like any person guiding the direction of the thing, that we're just like getting work from somewhere, some stakeholder saying, do this thing. Do you have a UX person on the team? Like how do you plan building something? And so the people that I interviewed with were able to talk about that really like thoroughly. But then also like, again, I was a recruiter for years and years and years, and there's a lot of ego in tech. And I always have.
No. Really?
Real, Todd, it's real. You know what I'm talking about. So like, I'm really sensitive to that as well. And I in some instances,
You just wanted to make sure they could all handle your ego.
Yes. That's it. Exactly. Really, like I just, yeah, I'm looking for humility. I'm looking for people that are just like want to help and are excited about what they're working on.
That's good. I mean, the humility. There are people who just think they are the best developer ever and can invent anything, and everybody should just bow down to this architecture. I said it, so it's clearly the best thing ever. There's definitely a lot of that in tech, and so that's a good call out right there. Emily, you're guiding lots of the next generation of developers. When when somebody in your community comes to you all excited and says, "Oh, I got an interview at this cool company," like what advice do you give them?
I give them a lot of advice. I think some of the key things, especially since I'm usually working with people who are transitioning in their careers, or just like starting off their careers, right? So they're brand new to tech. I'll try to coach them on think through your transferable skills. Like if you talk to a hiring manager in tech, aside from the list of tech skills that they need, they're also always looking for like communication and time management. And some of those divas with the egos we were talking about don't have those things, right? So you can really stand out if you can highlight some of those skills that you have. You might also have industry knowledge from like a user perspective. Like I used to work with Pizza Hut, they're headquartered here, and they loved bringing people on into their tech, onto their tech team that had ever like delivered pizza or worked a POS system, because they kind of understood the pain points, right? So that was like a valuable skill set that you might not think of when you're trying to get into tech, right? So if you have any like industry related knowledge, like play it up. It's actually very helpful. But then to that point, I would also say be your own gatekeeper. Like I've previously held sales jobs and I'm supposedly good at cold calling, but shoot me now, don't ever make me do that again. So I'm not going to put it on my resume. I'm not going to mention it in an interview. Don't make me do that because I don't want that job, right? So like, same with like, we know a lot of SharePoint developers who will never put it on their resume, right? Like whatever skill it is, right? Whatever skill it is you have that you're like, man, I had to do it, but please don't ever make me do that again. Like know that and keep that back too. So just highlight the things you want to do and hold back the things you don't want to do. And I think that goes a long way in finding the right position for you.
So yeah, keep SharePoint off of your resume. I had SharePoint on my resume for a while, and I got a lot of job offers for like come interview, come work with the so and so. You can be our SharePoint administrator. And I'm like, oh my god, you can't. There's not enough money in the world for that. Nope. That's awful. That sounds terrible. All right, so kind of in that theme of like gatekeeping stuff and making sure you don't end up in a job that you don't want. As you're interviewing or as you're learning about a company, what are like some red flags that like you hear this word or you see this concept and like you're out? Like I don't want any part of this anymore.
I actually try to draw them out. My favorite question, and I tell people everywhere to ask this, is when you get to that point, right, and you're allowed to ask the questions, say to the room, what's your favorite part about working here? And if you get crickets, like run, just leave. Like no one can come up with a thing they like about that place that's telling you something. But then really listen to what people say, because that will let you know if they're just there because, you know, right now it's some cool tech they get to work with. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but like they don't say anything about culture, like no one in the room does, and that's big for you. That's telling you something. So pay attention to what other people are referencing as their favorite, because those are the standout things for that particular company.
Again, a lot of, for me, what comes back to the job that you're looking for and the job that you want to get comes back to sort of your, I guess, responsibilities in life, because those are way more important to me than a particular job. A big question that I have or would have if I were going to look for another job would be, how much overtime, for example, they'd want you to work. It was cool when I was, 22 and just got out of school and didn't have any responsibilities, and I could code all the time. Not that I'd want to, but being 35 with a wife and 2 kids, like you can't give that. And I think that work-life balance is really important. So hours and how much you're working are really important, even if it's something that you enjoy working on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There are definitely some people in the world who equate value with number of hours worked. And if you see a boss, or if like the CEO works 70 hours a week, they kind of expect that from a lot of the people that work for them probably. And so if you get a culture of like, it's not about what gets delivered, it's about how much time is delivered, or how much time is worked. And that's kind of like there's a perceived value on it. Like that's a really strong signal that like, hey, if you're one of those people too, cool. Like just go into that knowing that are you going into a place that wants to own you, your time, your energy, everything you do, and you want to join that? Cool. If you're, not at that stage of your life and you want to work 40 hours and go home, make sure that the organization is going to be the kind that is cool with that. And there's other people there that just want to work 40 hours a week and go home. I've definitely been at companies that worked a lot and it was just expected. So that's a good red flag. Susan, any red flags for you? Like what would cause you to just bail out?
I mean, some of those things already touched on in terms of like personality fit, culture fit. Let's see. I guess one thing that I'm sensitive to also when I'm interviewing is, so we have this industry that is, there are more jobs than there are people to fill them, right? And companies are also becoming increasingly aware of the like discrepancy and diversity in their own workforce. And so they're trying to approach that with some like, we're going to have a staff that is 50%, I mean, it's usually women or people of color. And they use that as a selling point, right? Especially to female candidates. If they can't talk about how else they're doing that, how they like sponsor these people that they're bringing in, it starts to feel like this is a check mark on a box of like some kind of PR that the company's trying to use to like attract talent. So that's a red flag for me. If they can't talk about what the thing that they're seeming to be passionate about, that feels ingenuine and I don't want.
Yeah, you feel tokenized instead, and it's not helpful. Yeah, the program I work with, like we're trying to increase representation, but cautiously, and we make the companies we partner with go through equity, diversity, and inclusion training to make sure it's a welcoming environment too. Because if you're just saying we're going to hire women's way of 50%, and then you're jerks to them once they're there, like you're not going to retain them, nor should you, because it was just a PR stunt. So yeah, that's so important to be able to read the room and see if they're being real or just in it for how it looks, I guess.
Yeah.
Sarah, any red flags from you?
The list that I would provide has already been shared.
Awesome.
Yeah.
These are all everybody's red flags.
Mm-hmm. Understand the expectations across the board for time, diversity, culture.
All right. Well, so then let's assume that we've gotten to the point where no red flags have gone up. You did the interview, you crushed it, everything's going great. How do you? So now comes time to do the dirty capitalism thing and talk about money and negotiating compensation, which is a thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, especially when they're first coming into the industry. Or honestly, anytime you change jobs, there's always a little bit of heartache about like, how much money should I ask for? Is this offer right? Or that sort of thing. Like, Emily, what tips do you give people like who are maybe just breaking into the industry and have no real background into what tech compensation looks like?
I like that you labeled it tech compensation because it is a whole different beast. So even if you've like worked before, right, but in a different industry, oftentimes tech companies have some pretty sweet additional items. So compensation isn't just the salary. Like, yeah, it's an important part. We all have like houses to pay for, food to pay for. I have a lot of cats to get treats for and catnip. So like we all have things.
I have a lot of cats to pay for.
But yeah, there's like, so it's important. Like we have to worry about the money. And there are the obvious things like health insurance and whatnot. But more than that, like
as the cats.
Of course not. Yeah, you want to see if they have pet insurance. No. But you want to see like I get an allowance each year that I can spend how I wish on training. And I get extra PTO just for that. So I can go to conferences or some sort of training session or buy books or what have you, and I get that dedicated money set aside each year. Like, I like that. They invested in me in that way, and that's awesome. And then I have some freedom with that. So looking for like those unique benefits, PTO, I think, is another big one to look at, especially if work-life balance is important, or like flexibility in working from home, or flexing your schedule, things like that. Those are the things that really can make you miserable quickly if you don't pay attention to them. And money's the easy one to think about, right? You're always like, okay, here's my baseline. So I want to make X, and if I'm here, I'm happy. But if all those other things are like missing, you're still miserable. So I think it's really focusing on the rest of compensation. And then if you get the dreaded question from the employer before you get to like hear from them what their range is, and they're like, hey, how much are you looking to make? And you're like, damn it, I don't know yet. I always just like to say, like, let me see your full compensation package, what benefits look like here, and then I'll be more able to answer, or even push back and say, I want a better understanding of the job and what's going to be expected of me first before I can put a value on it. Like, don't be afraid to push back, because I think lots of times we get a little freaked out and throw out a number, and then if they agree to it, we're like, damn it, I should have gone for more, right? Or they look terrified and you're like, oh, but I really want to work here, and maybe I could do it for a little bit less if the benefits are right. So yeah, don't be afraid to push back, and make sure that you're getting the full compensation package that's going to work well for you and those you love, including your cats.
Including your cats, especially your cats. So potential employers for Emily, if you want to make her a job offer, give her a sweet cat package, and you got a chance. You got a chance.
Totally. They know. My cats join me on most meetings. I had to like shut them out for this. So.
Sarah, what are your thoughts on it? Like, when you negotiated for your thing with Kipsu, like what do you think about the process, and what tips would you offer?
So I didn't negotiate at Kipsu. Yeah, a lot of people are probably going to put a mark against me for future negotiation conversations. But at Prime, going through all their career readiness and career development topics, conversations, they encourage you to come up with what your absolute baseline number is, and then add about $7,000, and then give a really specific range. Don't round it off to a zero, or, it's not 50 to 55, make it 52 to 57, something a little bit more specific, that it's going to kind of catch someone's attention potentially, and they'll talk about it more. Going through my interviews with Kipsu, I was also interviewing for another role, and I was prepared to kind of go in with a negotiation between the two if it needed to come down to that. And after the interview process with the other company, I knew immediately walking out of that interview, I did not want to be there. It did not feel like a supportive environment. The hiring manager leading the interview continuously cut off another Prime graduate who's on their team in the interview with me. And you could tell that nothing here was going to be productive, supportive, mentorship related. So I knew I didn't want the role. And when they offered it to me, I thought they were kidding initially. And it was well above what I had initially put down as my range. And I could tell that they wanted to move quickly on it. And instead of negotiating in any way with Kipsu, all I came to them with was that I have this other offer. Can we speed up the interview process? Because everything I'm learning about the company, I would rather be on your team working for you, heads down in this scenario. So the compensation package with Kipsu wasn't something we actually discussed until the offer came through.
Okay. Do you think they raised their offer when you told them that you had another one?
I honestly don't think so. For little piece of information that I know now about some of the financial decisions at Kipsu, I don't think that changed it. They did, in fact, make the timeline go faster as far as the interview process goes, but I don't think that anything actually changed about what my offering was.
Okay. Any regrets? You said you didn't really negotiate. If you had it to go back in time and tell a younger version of yourself a tip, would you have negotiated differently, or would you have pushed for more or less different?
Yeah, if I could go back and do it again, I would probably have asked a few more questions about the time expectation, being a part of the customer success team and not more fully on the engineering team. That I think would have encouraged the conversation to go that direction. But also making a transition from working for a nonprofit in the arts through the boot camp, I was very happy with any number that was going to be handed to me.
Susan, what are your thoughts on it?
I don't have a ton of wisdom on this subject because I also have not had a lot of experience with this.
But you saw a lot of this through your recruiting, didn't you?
So, yes, I guess indirectly I had the benefit of knowing at a salary level what, your average senior engineer was making. I actually didn't work with a lot of QA folks, so I was a little bit blind in that way. But there are resources to find out, like what is a typical salary range for this role with this years of experience. And then I also just talked really honestly with somebody that was working somewhere where I was working to say, is this number crazy? Can I go confident with this number? Does this feel okay? Again, knowing what my bottom line was, there's a certain point when you get to a certain age that you just cannot accept anything lower, even if it means changing your career. It's not feasible. So knowing that number, I guess stating with confidence what you are looking for. But yeah, it's a tough and uncomfortable thing.
Yeah, everybody's a little uncomfortable with money. David, you got any thoughts on this before we move on to our next section?
It was kind of odd. So I told you I took the first job I could out of college just to get into the industry. So I took whatever was offered.
Yeah.
Moving to the next role, I took anything to get me out of that first spot. So far on the low side that the person who hired me gave me an extra 5 figures because they just said that's way too low. And then obviously when it came to Mozilla, I always wanted to be there. So it wasn't so much about the money when I was hired. I think one thing that I would add to this conversation that people hadn't mentioned yet was that once you're in a role, I've never been shy about saying I'm doing more than I was asked, or I'm doing better. I'm going above and beyond in advocating for either a monetary raise or I mean, I'd shy away from saying title raise because someone can give you a title and it means more responsibility and not more pay so much. But if you really feel like you're worth it and you feel like you're not being compensated fairly when you're in the role, you should never be afraid to step up and say, look, here's what I'm doing, make a list of achievements, make a list of responsibilities, and say, I feel like I deserve X much more. And I think that's really important that people advocate for themselves, not just in getting the job, but keeping themselves happy and keeping the employer fair once you're in that role.
Totally. I totally agree with that, especially if you've just had a big win. That's a great time to ask because they love you right then.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also told people during the negotiation for the job offer, if the company can't budge, ask if you can have a review at 3 or 6 months based on how you're doing and be eligible for increase then. And it's a short amount of time. If you really want to be there and they can't quite budge that little bit, let them see your worth in that time frame and get a bump then too.
I think that's a great tip. So we're running short on time, but I want to seize on this opportunity because we have 2 former recruiters turned tech on our panel today. And I think that gives us an interesting opportunity to talk about recruiting in tech briefly. And this could probably be a whole show in itself, and maybe we will do that show too. But as former recruiters now in tech, so you got to both be a recruiter and then probably interact with recruiters as well at this point. How can you tell the difference between that, LinkedIn jockey who just like doesn't really know the difference between Java and JavaScript. That's just blasting out 10,000 emails and says, "Hey, I see you insert title here at insert company here," kind of thing, from the ones who are actually going to help you.
Well, if they say C# instead of C#, stay away. I've actually had that happen. Honestly, going back to some of the tips in finding a job is similar to finding a recruiter. Like, network and get out there and see which ones are showing up at events and investing in the community instead of just trying to make money off the community. And that'll go a long way. Ask for referrals and then treat it like dating. You only need one that works. So go out to coffee with a couple of them. Find one where you're like, okay, you're not a total jerk. I could handle like seeing you. Here's my list of things I want. Call me when it happens. Don't worry about me until then. And if they listen, like, they're probably a good recruiter. That's
great. I think I did that with Susan.
Yeah.
Probably over beers once, but not instead of coffee. But
I'm in Louisville, so we do it over bourbon, really.
Never ask people for coffee.
What are your thoughts, Susan?
I mean,
I can tell this. The look on your face is just like, oh, I could talk on this for hours.
I think, I mean, Emily, you're right, and that's certainly how I was tried to be as a recruiter, is to show up and be a part of the community and not be so like.
That face said so much. Yes.
Impersonal. There's a lot of opportunity for that. LinkedIn makes that really easy. But for me, now that people are actually recruiting me, which is a fun new thing, if you get a job offer that matches a job or like a position that you had 5 years ago, for example, like I get hit up every single day for recruiting gigs, which like I haven't been doing that for 2 years now. So like people that can't read.
That's still meta. There's recruiters.
Oh yeah. They also suck.
Envy of recruiting. Yeah, that also, again, it's all in how you portray yourself and what people latch on to. But if you can see that I've only been in tech for 2 years, probably I'm not ready for a lead Ruby gig. I'm just gonna say that. I have a lot of confidence in myself, but so it's like people are matching you with opportunities that just do not make sense for you, whether it's your skill set or trajectory. That's a big red flag.
My experience with recruiters has really turned 180. When I was like a year after I had started my blog, where I had 3 years experience total, I had a recruiter come to me about Mozilla. Now, I didn't know it at the time. I was so naive. I didn't realize that this person didn't work for Mozilla, but they got me a flight out there and an interview, so I didn't really care. But I thought about it. I was like, whoa, I'm going to get a shoe deal. I'm going to get a fancy car, almost like an agent or something, right? Like, whoa, this is unbelievable. And of course, it didn't work out that time. But now, with 15 years experience in the industry and plenty of people blocked on LinkedIn, I think that I sort of really dislike recruiters now. I feel like I get a ton of boilerplate emails. Today I was, hey, we need a .NET developer in this farm town in Wisconsin. And I was like, did you put any effort into this? Because no one's going to jump from Mozilla to a small thing, not to sound like I have a big ego, because of course we don't like that, but like it just doesn't make sense, On the flip side, I've had a couple of recruiters over the past couple of years immediately mention the soccer team that I like in an email, or say, hey, congrats on the launch of this thing that I tweeted about that I did for Mozilla. And so it's like, for me, it's more obvious than ever who's actually doing a decent job and, cares at all. versus, the copy and paste spammers on LinkedIn. And like, I'd sort of like to hear from our recovered recruiters about, is there a monetary difference? I guess it's like any other business where you're going for volume instead of quality sort of thing. Like how has there become such a massive gulf in between, those two types of recruiters?
So I don't think they make more money by spamming everybody. Like the way the company I worked for was structured, you only get paid on placement. So it doesn't matter how you do it. And we had freedom to do it how we wanted. So for me, like making connections, I made better placements because I understood the people and I put the same work in to understand the company to do my best to make a match that was going to work. So it was worthwhile for me to invest my evenings networking and getting to know people versus sending like 500 LinkedIn messages about some job in some farm town in the middle of nowhere that no one's going to want. So it paid off better for me. I also felt better about the work I was doing and felt like I was being a better person for myself, for the company I was helping to place someone at, and for the person who was being placed. So I think it's more about like the recruiter's perspective than about a monetary thing. Because I didn't get paid by emails sent. And like if you looked at my metrics when I was a recruiter versus like everyone else in the office in terms of like phone calls and emails, mine were like the lowest. But in terms of networking events, they were the highest. And for a while, I was like half the profit for our team of 4. So yeah, for me, it just worked better to do it the hard way.
The right way.
Yeah, I see.
The right way.
I suppose, and it sounds bad, but I suppose it's like, every other a job where you see like the people, you can tell the people giving the most effort, and you can tell the people who are trying to, I guess, skate by. Yeah, and then unfortunately with recruiters, we start, like us as tech people take it personally because they're trying to sell us. And I think that's why people get so frustrated with LinkedIn.
Totally. My dirty secret though is for a while I was certified in LinkedIn. That's actually a thing. I've let it lapse. I'm in recovery, remember? I've let it lapse.
Wow.
I know,
All
that's
right.
a thing.
Yeah. On that note, Todd.
On that note, now that we have our certified LinkedIn recruiting professional in the room, I think it's time to wrap this right up. So we like to end all of our shows with doing a takeaway and like pointing out like maybe something that was said or a point that was made that we think was just really, really interesting and kind of wrap everything up. So David, why don't you go first? What do you think was really interesting from today's show?
I think that the thing that sticks out to me, and one thing that I try and tell junior engineers, whether they're at Mozilla or anywhere else, is really to advocate for yourself. And that doesn't just mean money. It can mean benefits. It can mean, extra PTO, extra allowance to go to conferences. That's something as a young person in tech, I was really, really poor at. And I sort of let myself get beat up and upset about where I was. And part of that was on me because I didn't communicate that. So that was my takeaway. What about you, Todd?
Well, I'm going to go last. So let's get our panel in here first. Sarah, what do you think? What if you could leave our listeners with one nugget of truth, what would it be?
I think it would be piggybacking onto Susan's statements about your networking, your brand, making sure that people see you places and you get those face-to-face interactions, because that's going to be one of the more memorable ways people are able to capture you and know how you'll bring your personality to work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything you want to plug before we wrap this up?
Keep the Eventbrite for Minneapolis Junior Devs always open and aware. Our tickets tend to go quickly. We've got an event coming up next week, which is every second Tuesday of the month. And we've always got fun topics.
Awesome. We'll leave a link for that in the show notes.
Cool.
Susan, what kind of takeaway would you leave with our listeners?
I'm trying to synthesize kind of what we've all been talking in direct and indirect ways about community and how that helps in contexts like looking for a new job, of course, salary negotiation, if you can like trust people inside to tell you the truth about what they make, even if it's uncomfortable, ultimately it helps everybody. Yeah, it's true for me. I have had many opportunities because of that, and I don't think there's any way that will just ever stop being the most effective way to continue progressing.
That's great. Anything you'd like to plug before we wrap things up?
No, but I'll see you at PubConf.
Woo! Emily, what are your thoughts on today's show? What takeaway would you like to leave?
I really liked what Susan said about like playing. We're all talking about community here. I think that was a big thing. But saying that it's like interviewing all the time, I think that's so true, but not in a scary way, right? Like actually in a nice way. So yeah, I loved that. I thought that was awesome. Yeah, it was great, and it has been very real for me too.
That is a very good point. I like that one as well. Anything you'd like to plug before we wrap things up?
Nothing to plug. I'm just really sad I'm not going to be at PubCon. Ever since I've heard about this, I'm like, this is amazing. I have to find a way to go, but
you got
someday.
time. Get in the car. Let's go.
I even live in the next city and I can't get there ever. We'll make it one time together.
Yes, totally.
All right. For me, the thing that nobody really brought up, but I really love this, and I think this is something that Susan said, is when you're interviewing, asking and being direct about what sucks about a job. I think that was a fantastic question. Understanding like every job that you're going to go into is going to have bad things, and a big part of your role in interviewing in that job is to figure out what did you say, Emily? 2 pounds of bad stuff, 2 pounds of shit, something like that. 2 pounds of shit that are in the job. Yeah. Understanding what that is, because it's never all roses no matter where you go, and so understanding what the downsides are, I think, is a really important thing to do. And I think that's a good tip. And the only thing I have to plug is PubConf, which we've already talked about ad nauseum. So that's what I got to go and get ready for as soon as we're done recording the show. So I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all our panelists for being on the show today. David, I think we're all set. What do you think?
I think it's good to go. It's Monday night. I'm ready for a beer. I've been flow typing all day.
All right, well then let's get you your beer. Thank you everybody for being on the show. We'll be back. We'll get the show notes up with the links to everything that we talked about. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Adios.
Bye. Thanks, Todd.